Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PetroNerds podcast. My name is Trisha Curtis. I am the CEO of PetroNerds and the host of the PetroNerds podcast, and I am absolutely delighted to be with you here today. Today is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. I'm about to jump on a plane and head to Midland because I'm speaking at a Whitley Penn conference tomorrow. I'm the keynote, and I'm super, super excited about that. But right now, it is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. This is episode 139 of the PetroNerds podcast. And like all episodes, I have got a lot to cover, and I've got an absolute treat for you today because this is the fireside chat that I did in Austin with Matt Gallagher and Bud Brigham. So those are two industry leaders that essentially do not need an introduction, but they hosted me in Austin for the first Austin Energy event. This was done at the end of May. Trust me, I've went through this. I've waited to drop this because we had a lot in the queue, but also I went through this, and this is a very dense and thorough, both a download and market digestion and slides that I give, as well as kind of a back and forth with both Bud and Matt and the audience. So it is an absolute treat. It's something you are not going to want to miss. But right now, Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. I'm going to keep this short and sweet because I need to run. But we're looking at 63.82 on WTI. We're looking at Brent at 67.73. I note this because this is basically where we were at the end of May, folks. The only difference is that at the end of May, folks were calling, hey, $60 is the new price signal. And we did hear plenty of people talking about 50s, but that had kind of went away a little bit from April. Now we have folks, again, in the field talking about 50s again. And we did hear Trump make some comments this week, just yesterday, actually, in his cabinet meeting, when he looked over at Doug Brigham and he looked at Chris Wright and he said, hey, we're doing great in energy. We have gas prices at below $3 a gallon, but we want to see oil prices below $60 a barrel. And I don't think those are helpful comments for a number of reasons you're going to hear within this talk, which is that we do need stability in oil prices, and $65 a barrel is not a bad price. It's not an amazing price for the industry, but it's also not a horrible price. It's not a bad price for the consumer, and it's certainly not a bad price for the economy or for demand. But with that being said, we have natural gas Henry Hub at $2.85. I think as long as we're staying close to $3, I don't think you're going to see a massive pullback necessarily on the gas side. And that means we're going to get more gas production because we are seeing these rigs, 20 rigs move from oil to gas. We're starting to see a plateau in the rig count. We're looking at the 10-year yield at 4.238%. That is relevant to point out because we did have Lisa Cook, a Fed governor or Fed individual of the Federal Open Market Committee, actually get fired by the Trump administration. I will have to talk about that more in future podcasts, but that is relevant. It is also interesting because you were hearing a lot of folks in stock market commentary ask why this isn't a bigger deal, right? Why it's not being priced in more, people are concerned. And the market is actually shrugging that off to a large degree. And that is probably because they are very, very focused on actually bigger issues. If you're concerned about markets, stuff that's going on within France, lots of stuff going on with France with a potential election issues because of their budget issues. I mean, they have had a slug of different leadership within France. So that's taking place right now. And then you have right now at this moment, you have NVIDIA that has just dropped earnings. So the market's really actually focused on NVIDIA and earnings and really actually looking to NVIDIA and other companies to tell them about China. So I'm going to talk about three big things with regards to oil. And that is that Trump's comments, which we just talked about, that were yesterday. And then we're going to talk about India and tariffs, which just happened yesterday, and that connection with Russia, and sort of recap you on the geopolitical space of what's happening with regards to oil. But to start off with NVIDIA, the thing that I just heard, and I have not had a chance to go through their earnings call, and I'm not advising anyone or telling anyone which stocks to purchase. So putting a disclaimer there. But NVIDIA, when it dropped, obviously it beat expectations, but they said they had no sales for the H20 chip to China in the second quarter. Now, I imagine that Vincent Wan wants to have sales in the third quarter. He's been over there, but you've heard China actually coming back and saying they don't want these chips, right? They're actually advising folks not to buy them because they've also heard that NVIDIA is putting trackers or information on these chips so they can know where they're being used so that we can actually impose restrictions on these chips. Now, China's saying this is a backdoor. They can track them and they can do all kinds of things and they can hurt China. Well, China is serious about this or concerned about this because that is what they do. So that is definitely a China play. But these H20 chips were actually built for the China market, right? They were kind of a scaled down version. Now, they're nowhere near, both you've heard Vincent Wan, you've heard a lot of other people, including the President of the United States, Trump, talk about the amazing Blackwell chips. Now, and Trump has even mentioned they could have a scaled down version of Blackwell chips going to China. China is pushing back on this a little bit because they're concerned. They don't want to build their stack and all their AI on US chips that could then be pulled and restricted. Now, I think it's really important to put in this context. That does not mean that China is not doing this, right? You can do a lot of damage with chips that are not up to spec. And if you're just dumping like crazy and you're building out all these models and you're learning and you have a ton of energy. And I think that's really, really important. Taylor Millard just quoted me in the DC Journal for an article on the AI chip, on the AI race with China and the fact that China is leading when it comes to energy. They're not leading on the chip space or AI necessarily, but when it comes to energy and being able to outcompete us there, they are, because they have 1/3 of the world's power generation. And that is something you're going to hear a lot in the context of this conversation, this fireside chat with Matt and Bud. So that's NVIDIA, right? I think you're going to hear a lot more about that, but that's taking over the market right now. There's going to be a lot of oscillation in the market with what's that telling us. I think what it's gleaning and what it's telling you about China is really, really important, and what that means for the future. Now, that's also really relevant, and it gets into oil a little bit, because what we're hearing, what we have going on with China right now is a back and forth, a trade back and forth, right? We're trying to make an agreement on trade, and China has a big card to play right now with regards to rare earths and magnets. This weekend, China just didn't restrict, but put impositions on their imports of rare earths. That really means that they're just controlling and probably trying to scale up as much rare earth imports as they can, so they can really control the market. They control the market on all the refining of rare earths, and particularly these magnets right now, which are impacting a lot of manufacturers, particularly the autos. So it's really, really important to watch that. That's why you're not hearing as much about that right now, is because we are in this tit for tat back and forth with China. And so this gets into oil, because what happened last night was the 50% tariff on India actually got imposed. Now, that 50% tariff is because India is purchasing Russian crude oil. Now, everyone says they're purchasing about 1.7 million barrels per day. They're actually purchasing close to around 2 million barrels per day. And, Russia's producing around 10 million barrels per day. They're exporting a lot of this crude oil. Probably over 2 million barrels a day is going to India. Over 2 million barrels a day is going to China. The reason China's not being talked about in the same degree, and Secretary Scott Bessent isn't being completely clear on this, or truthful on this, is that they're not talking about China because they're in the midst of this negotiation with regards to trade and this tariff deal, and we're dealing with magnets and everything. But India is purchasing over 2 million barrels a day from Russia. And I'm glad that this has been called out. But the point is, for me, is that China is also purchasing over 2 million barrels a day. So Secretary Scott Bessent actually said, hey, Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent said, India's purchasing this crude oil, and then they're refining it, and then they're selling it on the market, and they're buying it at a discount. And this is just bad. And this is helping Russia. Well, yeah, this is helping Russia. This is why, that Russia's been able to get through this entire war, is because they've had a massive amount of funding from crude oil that really hasn't gone down. And so they were able to restrict all their flows, cut off the pipeline, all their flows to Europe for natural gas, because that's not where the leverage was. That's where the leverage was. That's not where the money was. The money was in oil. And so they've been really good and pretty resilient at selling all this crude oil, even at a discount, keeping their economy afloat and keeping this war going and continuing. So that's where you have this big, so that just happened, right? That was 10 p.m. last night, Mountain Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when the tariffs were imposed. So that was the 25% tariff on India, plus another 25% to make it to 50 on overall tariffs because of their crude oil purchases from Russia. That's not happening to China, but that is something in the back of everyone's mind that could happen. Now, obviously, this would have an impact for oil prices, right? It would mean that these countries would have to go around Russia, and you're not going to be able to easily supplant 4 million barrels a day. Now, you could, right? We could get more crude oil from OPEC, right? We could get more crude oil from Saudi Arabia, certainly get more crude oil from UAE and some other players relatively quickly, I think. So if we're talking about 1 million or 2 million barrels a day in this market that's pretty well supplied, it's probably doable. If we're talking about replacing 4 million barrels a day, that's a little bit of a different story. But prices matter for this. So I say this because I think prices are pretty well oversold when we're looking at 63.82. They're not reflecting this geopolitical risk, right? They're not reflecting these realities. And so when it comes to Russia, every time you're seeing, so if you a couple days ago, we were looking at nearly $65 a barrel, oil prices almost kissing $65 a barrel. Now, I think that's really important because I talk about this in the context of this talk and fireside chat you're going to hear is $65 a barrel. And I think that's relatively meaningful because it's an okay, healthy price for oil. It's not amazing. We've certainly had inflation. It's not the same as we had, 5 years ago if we were at $65 a barrel. But the point is, it's not 55, right? It's not 50. And I don't think we're going there. But at this level, at 63 something, we are oversold because we're going to have all these opportunities, and we've seen them, right? Where oil prices flirt back up, and that is because of the geopolitical risk, right? When I gave this talk, this is before we did the B-2 bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities, and now we're looking at Russia, and we had the meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska a couple weeks ago, and you had oil prices really sell off on that, and then since then we had Trump meeting with Zelensky and several European leaders within the White House just the next week, right? That next Monday and Tuesday. Well, nothing's happened since then, right? And we have not got a ceasefire. And so what Russia is looking to do, and there's a really good Financial Times article on this, Russia's looking to basically freeze the lines, right? And so they want Donbass. So they want to push as far as they can. So we're seeing Russia really increase their escalation of this war in terms of drone strikes and bombing and everything that they're doing on Ukraine. Ukraine is also increasing those strikes, particularly drone strikes on refineries, which is something not also being priced into oil. But you're seeing that because they want Donbass, right? That's what Russia wants, is they want to increase that leverage. They want to freeze the lines of territory they have, and they want to say, we'll do a ceasefire if we get this entire region that we've been trying to get, which they have quite a bit of. So if they freeze that, then they can basically reinforce and take time and then restabilize and then go after it in the future. And so the reason they want that is obviously so they can go after further lines of territory in the future. So with that being said, I really do not think the oil prices are aptly pricing in geopolitical risk. What they are telling you is that there's a lot going on in the economy, and there's a lot going on that's extremely messy, right? It's extremely messy because the stock market is not the economy. And so we have a lot of messiness in the economy. We do have a lot of supply on the market, which I've talked about at length. And so we have oil prices in this kind of weird, wonky, muted territory, but they are oversold. And you do have a lot of traders, I think, that don't fundamentally understand what all these geopolitical complexities that I'm talking about. So with that, I'm going to stop this because I want you to take the time to listen to this really, really a total treat to sit down with Bud and Matt, and a total treat that they let me, sit and go through all these slides and give this fireside chat and conversation. The questions from the audience are really, really good. So we'll dial up the speakers on that so you can hear that on the audio for that. But with that, thank you guys so much. I want to thank Matt Gallagher with Greenlake Energy, who is just crushing it. Again, on his additional venture in the Permian Basin. He is the former CEO of Parsley Energy that sold to Pioneer. You guys probably know that. And Bud Brigham, who really needs no introduction, who had Brigham Exploration, has a suite of portfolio companies now. But Brigham sold their position in the Bakken to Statoil, which is now Equinor. And now he has a suite of portfolio companies, including Atlas. And so these guys need no introduction, but just really want to thank them. I will be heading to Midland right now, actually, to speak at this conference for Whitley Penn tomorrow. So we will try to turn that into a podcast as well. So there's a lot coming in the queue. I'm heading to DC next week. And the op-ed that I also just dropped with this dropped in the DC, I think it's the Washington Examiner. And this is the op-ed I did as the economist for the American Energy Institute and the CEO of PetroNerds. And this is an op-ed that was a response to that wind turbine craze that you probably heard of, fossil freedom. And so it's this wind turbine manufacturer in Sweden who's talking about fossil freedom. And my first reaction was, you're absolutely right. Fossil is freedom. And I talk about that, how American oil is actually freedom. And so basically turn that on its head a little bit. So with that, folks, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Welcome, everyone. Fun to look around and see the Austin energy community together over lunch. So I'm glad everybody could make it. And most importantly, fun to see Bud here.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah. We have the pleasure of hosting Trisha Curtis with PetroNerds. I'm going to do a quick bio for her. It was over a page long, so I'm going to kind of do the Cliff's Note version. But if you don't know her, President and CEO of PetroNerds, Director of Research Upstream and Midstream at Energy Policy Research Foundation in Washington, D.C. Before that, she was Manager of Strategy and Analytics at Anschutz Exploration in Denver. Globally recognized for her knowledge in U.S. shale, and has been asked to speak and present at several academic, industry, and investor forums, as well as her knowledge on China, deep knowledge on China. Pentagon, she's spoken with the Pentagon, OPEC in Vienna, SPE in Bahrain, IEF in Saudi Arabia, Stanford University, we won't hold that against you. The Chatham House, is that where the rules come from?
Yep,
okay.
That is.
Oxford University, Denver University, and last but most important, Colorado School of Mines. She hosts the PetroNerds podcast. If you haven't tuned in, dial in. And you're a board member at Denver Earth Resource Library. and a research associate at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. I don't know where you find all the time. What am I missing here? A lot. But she hails from Colorado and southwest Wyoming, and she's one of us. She grew up near pump jacks, worked on oil and gas sites in Colorado and Wyoming with her father. So we'll turn it over to her momentarily, but again, just one more time, wanted to say thanks for bringing the Austin Energy group together, and turn it over to Bud.
No, it's great to see all of you here, and this is going to be a real treat. Obviously, it's very topical, having Trisha here at this point in time where there's so much disruption going on. So I'm looking forward to learning from the discussion.
Real quick on the agenda, she has a lot of slides. We went through and tried to condense them. She's going to hit the high notes off the front, and then Bud and I might ask a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. Take it away, Trisha.
Awesome. Well, I am really pleased to be with you guys. I'm going to stand up and do this. And so what Matt didn't say is that he said 10 slides. And then when I sent him 30 and said, what do I delete? Both of them said, don't delete anything. So we didn't end up deleting anything. But typically, I usually know my audience pretty well. Most people want more is more in my book. I don't think less is more. So you're going to get more is more. I'm going to go through the high stuff fast. It's sort of like I'm going to do two things. I'm going to try to speak fast and slow at the same time. We're going to front load with kind of the answers, and then we'll go through the slides. The thing we might cut in the back end is a little more granularity on U.S. shale. We're going to dive in. So. Holy smokes, 2025. I think it really is. This is a definitely a volatile year. One of the biggest things, the biggest themes, if I was just to condense this and tell you the big takeaways right now, is that I think we are struggling, both as an industry but as the market. People don't understand oil prices, like fundamentally. Like oil prices right now are not reflecting supply and demand. And it's interesting because I would not call myself an oil bull. You know, I was not on the bandwagon post-COVID coming out that we were just going to race to 85 and stay there forever. And we have a lot of folks in the industry that were, and that's okay. But the fundamentals of the economy, right? The economy drives the demand side, and the geopolitics really drives that supply side. And so right now, it's sort of oscillating around $60 a barrel when traders are just got their finger on the sell button. When you have OPEC moves, that's not supply and demand fundamentals, that's just trading. And so we have super exacerbated moves in oil prices right now. And so WTI, it's actually pretty thinly traded. If you look at post-COVID, the trading of WTI has dropped a lot. And so what happens every time we have an OPEC meeting on Sunday, right after the tariff on Liberation Day on April 2nd, comes April 3rd, and people click the sell button, you know, because OPEC says they're going to increase output. Now, does that, like, did they actually increase by all the output? No, they increased a few 100,000 barrels a day. I'll show you that. It hasn't quite shown up, but oil prices right now are basically baking in a recession. And I will say that in December of last year, we were at $69 a barrel. I think in December of last year, oil prices are reflective, they were reflecting reality. They weren't giving you a massive geopolitical risk premium, but they were giving you some, and they were reflecting supply and demand. We are not doing that right now. We're a little oversold, and I think, you know, at $60 a barrel, you're absolutely oversold. You should probably be around 65 because we have so much geopolitical risk in the market. And so what I don't hear on CNBC or Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal or Financial Times is I don't hear that clarity in the market of people really deeply understanding this. And so the day after we have an OPEC move, when people get on TV and they ask them, why would Saudi do this right now? Well, it makes perfect sense to me why Saudi would do this right now, and I can't believe I don't hear more people talking about that. Of the Saudis are increasing output because there's blood in the water, and most importantly, they're increasing output because they gave you a 1 million barrel day cut that was a lollipop, like candy cut to the entire market, and they propped up the whole market. And now they're just saying, we would like to put that production back because we want our market share back. And so I'll get into this a little bit of seeing where you see these OPEC players. I don't think they're really going after U.S. shale per se, but they are going after other OPEC players that have been cheating. They've been kind of increasing output. Iran is one of those, right? Iran has been increasing output. Russia's been, you know, kept their output very, very high during this war. And the Saudis have had kind of a fine line where they've kept this really nice, you know, continuity. And really that OPEC lollipop cut, they were able to tell the market we have OPEC continuity, but they really didn't. They just cut 1 million barrels a day, and so they gifted the market. So we have a lot of that going on, and I don't hear that stuff explained within the market. And then the economy, the economy wasn't doing amazing before, like, we're coming out of COVID. We have $27 trillion of global economic stimulus that's in the market right now, still in the market. It's created massive inflation, and that money is still chasing yield. So when we think about trading oil, right, there's only so much money in the market. So when we had $80 oil in January because we had these supposed sanctions that we were going to sanction 1.6 million barrels a day of Russian crude, and it was the vessels. Well, oil prices went to 80, and I'm talking to clients, and they're like, well, how long can it stay here? And I'm like, it could stay here for a few weeks, but it's not real, right? The supply and demand fundamentals were not $80 a barrel. This often happens in January. We get a spike. Great time to hedge. Would have said like $8 would have been awesome to hedge. You see it flirting in the 60s. That's a great time to hedge too. But the reality is that that wasn't trading on supply and demand fundamentals, and then we've declined since then. So we have a disconnect in the market in terms of understanding what's going on. So supply and demand not reflecting price. Lower oil prices in a weaker economy, right? That's a really big deal. Something I'm not hearing folks, at least, and from the oil and gas industry, I hear a lot of folks are obviously not happy with prices, and I do understand that. And I think the Trump administration is walking a very fine line by wanting more output and also wanting low oil prices. The reason the Trump administration wants low oil prices is because we've had this massive inflation that I mentioned for several years, and it's really serious. We're now at the point when you've had 4 years of inflation like this that most consumers are tapped out. And even the high-end consumers, even like people that are making north of 100, 200,000 a year, when they're shopping at Costco, they are now trading down. They're now trading down to the store brand items because they're just getting tapped out. And so when I hear Costco, when people are trading down from steaks to beef, and when I hear in Kohl's, people just aren't spending, that's when you know you have both problems. You're starting to see on the high end, and you've already been seeing on the low end. So the Trump administration is interested in lowering oil prices or keeping oil prices relatively subdued, because that's the single biggest way he can impact inflation quickly. Because unlike everything else, oil prices, when they go up, you see the price at the pump a few weeks later. When prices go down, you see the price at the pump a few weeks later. So it is a benefit to the consumer. And I will say something I'm not hearing the industry talk about either is the role of lower prices in a weakened economy, okay? So if we are weakening, if we have half the economy in recession already, and they've probably been in it, lower prices prevent this industry from losing demand. We prevent demand destruction. And what we always have in a recession typically is a spike in oil prices, then we have a recession, and then we crater demand. We do not want that. Like the last thing you want, and you can want it all you want, you can want $75 oil, we're not gonna get it, but if you did, you can guarantee yourself a recession, and you can guarantee yourself that we will lose demand. And so we don't want that. As an industry, we may have kind of a crappy year where it's kind of 60s-ish, but honestly, there's a lot of geopolitical risk out there that flirt that oil prices back up into 65 or even a little higher, but you really don't want that 75 or 80, and I do think that's something that it does feel like the Trump administration is keenly aware that we cannot have a price spike in oil prices. And so we can talk about more about what the Saudis are doing, what's going on with Russia. I know you're keen on pulling this thread. Threading this all together. There is a thread to this, and this is what I think the market's kind of missing, is that how interconnected geopolitics is with energy, and particularly with China, which we'll get into. So peak shale, this has also coincided, and plenty of you guys in the room, you might want to pick a bone with me on this. I think we've started to talk about peak shale a lot, and this has coincided with lower prices. So I think we have to be a little careful about what we're exactly talking about with peak shale, is that we are completely running out of inventory, we can't produce anymore, we have tapped out production. That's kind of cute at over 13 million barrels a day of production, when we're the largest producer in the entire world. I think we have to put that in perspective of, is it we can't bring more wells on, we just don't have them. Every time we push this industry a little further, we incrementally eke out a little bit more. So I'm not saying it's fun. I'm third generation oil and gas. I grew up on the labor side of the business. I know the boom and busts, and I feel like we've forgotten a little bit as an industry, the boom and busts. We came out of COVID. Holy crap, that was awful. Most of us lost our jobs. And so now we're coming back, we've had this strength, and now we're in kind of this weaker part. I do also appreciate that we've had massive inflation in this across the board, but we've also had it in this business. And so it's important to realize that while I disagree with the Wall Street Journal article on peak shale, the comment that we need $85 oil, I disagree with that. But I do agree that we've had inflation in the space. And so $65 oil today doesn't feel like $65 oil 5 years ago. And that's real. But that also means that that doesn't mean you're going to get 75, or you can have 75. So it's kind of a reality check. And then China, tariffs in the US, so last night what you saw, if you were watching the news and what you're seeing today, a little bit of pickup in the stock market. People are excited because a court ruled against the Trump administration on tariffs. That is not the tariffs on autos, that is not the tariffs on steel, that is just the tariffs on the reciprocal tariffs. So we'll talk about that. I think again, I'm not hearing the stock market, I'm not hearing anyone talk about is one, an understanding of China, like our competitive nature with China. We should be way more worried about China than we are about Russia. Not saying Russia's not bad, not saying we shouldn't be worried about Russia, I'm just saying they are not the only boogeyman in the closet. So the thing with China, if you read the executive orders from the Trump administration on energy, on across the board on energy, but also with regards to tariffs, I've not heard a single person on TV talk about the executive orders tied to tariffs. What they all talk about is national defense and building out your industrial base. So everyone loves to talk about the fact that we got to bring, it's about bringing manufacturing jobs to the US, and we can't bring them back because they died in the 80s and they died in the 90s and China beat us out and we're not bringing those back, they're dead. It is not about bringing the manufacturing jobs back. It is about ruining the rest of your economy and completely deindustrializing so you do not end up like Europe and you have no industrial base. And it is the industrial base in the US and Europe to an extent, but largely the US, that won World War II. And so it's very hard for people to wrap their arms around this, but it's super important. I'm not warmongering and saying World War III, but that is what China's thinking about. They're thinking the long-term competition, right? And we are not thinking about that. It is long-term competition and is with the strategic adversary. And so the threat in all of this is China. So Russia-Ukraine, that's been going on for 3+ years. I think the Trump administration is realizing it was a great idea. I was not against it, trying to get a deal with them. Were you ever going to get a deal? Probably not, because Russia doesn't want a deal, right? Russia's going to say, I'm going to give you a deal, but then they're just going to keep doing on what they're doing because there's no reason for Russia not to keep going after Ukraine. China is the biggest beneficiary of all of this, so they are funding this war. They're also, giving Russia all this stuff. They're also getting a lot of crude oil, a lot of coal, a lot of grain in return. This hugely benefits China. How come Europe is not more upset about China? Big question mark. That's because they're exposed so much on trade. So why are we taking trade with China seriously? I don't know. Might be because they're so interconnected and exposed to the entire world, we need to start taking it seriously. The tariffs were a way to do that. I have to say, I wanted a hawk in office, and when I saw the 145% tariffs on China, I was probably the only person that thought this was awesome. This was the first administration in 40 years since Kissinger and Nixon to say, we're done letting China just push us over. So Middle East, Iran, and Israel, we have to go hard on Iran. I don't think we're going to get a deal with Iran, and this is why the Saudi OPEC increases really do matter. Iran's producing over 3 million barrels a day. They're exporting over 2 million barrels a day to China. That is a lot of money to fund a lot of nefarious activity with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with the Houthis. And yeah, maybe we solved it for a short time with the Houthis. We have not solved it with Hamas. There is no interest by Hamas and Iran to stop going after Israel. This is a long-term game. They do not want them to exist. So Israel is simply defending their right to exist, and we are supporting them. This administration is supporting them. Expect that to continue. You can hear all the talk about deals. I don't think those deals are going to go through. Biden administration wanted those deals too. But the big question mark is, when do we really start to sanction those barrels and move those barrels from the market and actually impact Iranian production and Iranian revenues? Again, China's that thread. China's giving them that money. China's deeply connected with Iran. They're deeply connected with North Korea. They're deeply connected with Russia. So you want to know the thread of all these nefarious actors, it is absolutely China. And that's not being addressed at all. Energy is everything. I'm going to talk about power generation because that's really huge, is that, the cost of electricity. We have more oil and natural gas in this country than any nation in the world that we're producing. We have plenty more to produce. And we have more coal in this country than any nation in the entire world, including China. Yet China produces more than half of the world's coal and consumes more than half the world's coal. We should not have a problem with energy in this country. We should sure as hell not have a problem with energy in the state, but we do in Texas. You have a grid problem because you have people that want a lot of wind and solar in your grid. And I am going to break your hearts if you're a fan of wind and solar, because I am not, right? I've studied it and studied it and studied it, and I feel like energy, especially power, it's one of those things like China. If you study China, there's no way you're going to end that studying, or you just get deeper and deeper, and you realize China's bad. And then you just realize it's had the degree, and it's really bad. So you go down that rabbit hole in China, you will realize they are not good. If you go down the rabbit hole in energy, you realize that wind and solar is absolute crap. It comes from China, it comes from forced labor, and when you put it into your grid, your electricity prices go up. So all these subsidies and all these things, and yes, maybe it works in Hawaii and with the sun, and maybe it works in Saudi Arabia. But really, when you start to put it into your grid and you force it into your grid and you take out the baseload power generation like coal that's cheap and reliable and affordable, your prices go up. And those escalating prices, they not only impact everyone in this room for the consumer, which is so important for the consumer that's struggling and needing help with inflation, it's businesses, it's manufacturing. So if I cannot affordably power these light bulbs, I sure as hell can't affordably power a industrial manufacturing center, and that's what we're talking about. So when Jensen Huang with NVIDIA is talking about the power generation, the fact that the US is now talking about making sure we have affordable power, that's huge. That incentivizes businesses to come back. And that is the continuity that I do see in the executive orders and I do see within the White House. You're not hearing it because I don't think the Trump administration cares about televising anything. But if you're looking for it, you will find a thread. Okay. I encourage you to take a look at this article. This is one I did with Jason because I'm an economist with the American Energy Institute. So the industry is all talking about what does drill baby drill mean. I explained that this is really about drill baby drill is we want the U.S. open for production. We don't want high oil prices, but we're going to help you do business. And I do think there has to be a little, what the Trump administration needs is an intermediary to help them with the market side. Chris Wright needs another person helping explain the things that he's doing, which is really important. Peak shale, I think that, I'm not criticizing Diamondback. I think this is what they did, which was smart for them. But the market went crazy with this, right? The market went nuts when Diamondback put out this letter to shareholders and everyone listened to it. And then I heard people on CNBC talking about the U.S. needing to cut 2 million barrels per day. That's bananas. We don't need to cut 2 million barrels per day. That's a lot of production. By the way, why should we be the ones that necessarily cut that? And by the way, if we're cutting, does that necessarily, if everyone else is increasing output, is that going to help? So we have to be very careful thinking about that. The comment, though, from this U.S. drillers say peak shale has arrived. I mean, drillers, is that the rig companies? Is that the drilling? So I just don't like the title of that for a lot of reasons. But this thing, we need $85 a barrel. Ring Energy, I listened to the earnings call. They are actually in the Central Basin platform, so they're not in the heart of the Delaware or Midland. So it does make sense that maybe they need higher oil prices. Remember to be humble. I put this in here. If you look at IEA, so that's the International Energy Agency in Paris, or OPEC, or the EIA here in the US, no matter what, we always forecast it wrong. So I say this, if you guys are very confident about peak shale right now, I can tell you, I can guarantee you're going to be wrong. I'm going to be wrong. I'm just, going to continue to evolve my thought process. The problem is that we take the moment we're in and we extrapolate it forward. So right now, people are nervous about prices, and it's very interesting because if you actually listen to all of Diamondback, they're actually thinking, hey, we pull it now, we don't drill our best wells, and maybe things get better in the back half of the year, and then we add it. So they want flexibility, and I totally get that. But when we think about where we're at for prices, in 1998, we had $8 a barrel. So we had pretty low oil prices up to 2002. So I just pulled this for 2002 for perspective. In 2002, the EIA thought that the high oil price would be less than $40 a barrel through 2020, which is ridiculous. They also thought that we would have demand because we had such low oil prices at 120 million barrels a day in 2020, and we didn't. So the other things they got wrong was that basically the big things, all of these forecasts get wrong is they take the moment they're in, the chaos, the craziness, 2008, 1998, they take it and they extrapolate it forward. And what happened was we actually produced a lot more oil with lower oil prices, so the US was a leader in that. OPEC did not produce 60 million barrels a day, which is what this forecast said OPEC would be producing. OPEC's not even producing 30 million barrels a day now. And we didn't demand as much at 40, because oil prices impact demand, but it depends, right? If you're China and India, you kind of just demand it anyway. But if you're actually the US or Germany or Japan, lower oil prices actually uptick demand. That's another piece I want to remind folks is that in 2018, the US, Germany, and Japan, the developed world, we led the world in demand growth. Not China, not India. And that was because we had low prices and the economy was ripping and they were just grabbing onto it. So we have to appreciate what lower prices do in a weak economy as well as what lower prices do in a ripping economy. They are a big boon, and it's something, I'm not saying low prices are great, I'm just saying it's $60 a barrel, it is not 40. So we need to put that in a little bit of perspective. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, it is a put. So it is kind of this floor. I don't hear this being talked about either. This is what the Biden administration did by selling this off. We did not actually, we were not short barrels in the global market, right? We had the barrels, but we had high prices because of this war in Ukraine and the price spike and everybody going nuts and traders going crazy. So the Biden administration did not want those high oil prices, so they sell off the SPR. It's a nice piggy bank too. They're getting the money, the barrels are going to the market, and it did impact prices, right? Prices helped come down. We're adding like 1 million barrels a day at some point, and then we are starting to refill here. Now, Chris Wright has mentioned that he is going to Congress to ask for more money because there's some damage done to the SPR that he wants to fix, but he's refilling it. And we do have a floor because as prices go lower, that's a great time to refill your SPR. So I don't think we should really be going below 55 because I feel like they would be refilling the SPR like crazy, or at least they should be, and they should be doing it now. And we're actually seeing that in the data. But this also suggests that we do have some supply-demand fundamentals going on. We have some weakness in demand, or we don't have this demand growth, and we have this over trading on oil. I know I don't have enough time for this, but I have to do it. So Chris Wright, he just said, the night and day what we've seen from the previous administration to now, and I always make this joke, you can see it well, actually, because you're close enough. This is the previous administration. This is literally on the Biden administration's website for energy. And it's like investing in America. And again, don't like wind turbine, don't like these solar panels because those ingot wafer, even if that was made in the US, those ingot wafers come from China. They come from the province of Xinjiang. They come from forced labor, which I care a lot about, more than coal. And they're made with coal because you need a lot of heat and energy to make solar panels. But more importantly, there's a piece of paper they're holding, and they're like, this guy's looking at the camera, these ladies are pointing at this, and it's awesome, and there's nothing on that piece of paper. It is completely blank. It is just a poster there's nothing on it. I don't know, you could be bothered to put something on it, so it's just like a blank piece of paper. That is case in point of the Biden administration. Now, we've got Chris Wright, who is getting criticized on the Hill last week, and he's testifying, and he testified that during the moment Trump was elected, between Biden left office, that was 76 days. The Department of Energy gave out $93 billion in loans in 76 days. That is more than $1 billion a day to a lot of companies that didn't actually have a business plan or anything. And I know this because I validated it by speaking to companies how quickly they got their loans. It was amazing. So that is absolutely waste, fraud, and abuse and poor use of government funding. I have been impacted by DOGE. I have been impacted by government cuts severely, and so it does frustrate the hell out of me that the work I do for the Pentagon is impacted, but people who had wind and solar, and we're actually seeing this. You're seeing this in states that are pushing back on the bill, right? The big beautiful bill. They're pushing back because they don't want the green energy subsidies cut, right? States and that's big business. That's big wind and solar businesses not wanting their subsidies cut because they were given billions by the Biden administration to build this. That's not going to the masses, and I guarantee you it is going to increase your electricity prices. So that's something that was really bad. Something Chris Wright also talks about is primary energy consumption, and he talks about the fact that renewables, why we think it's 8% of our grid or 9.3% of our primary energy consumption, that number's not real. And that is because we have to scale up for a thermal equivalent. So we don't really have 9.3% of primary energy consumption. But really important here, I'm just showing you the difference between the US and China in 2023. The green part is oil. So primary energy consumption. Most developed world economies like Germany, Japan, all these guys, we have about 30% of our primary energy consumption is oil, right? That's diesel, that's shipping, that's trains, that's everything, and flying and everything. China, over half of their primary energy consumption is coal. Now that makes sense because they don't have a lot of oil and they have a lot of coal. But what doesn't make sense is the fact that they're less than 20% oil. So I point this out because it's so important, is that China's economy is tilted toward electricity. So when we're wargaming, you're on the military side, everybody is focused on China's imports to oil and that we can impact the oil and that they won't have a war because they need oil imports. Well, their primary energy consumption is less than 20% oil. And actually, from now, like compared to 1980, they consume on a percentage basis, they have less oil exposure than they did in 1980, and they consume more coal. That is all about energy security. That means that, one, you're never going to lower their CO2 emissions, so get that out of your head. That's not happening. We're not lowering global CO2 emissions. They're the leader in global CO2 emissions. But more importantly, it means that it's about energy security, and that's how they make things, right? That's producing and manufacturing things. And that's not just solar panels and t-shirts and Barbie dolls. That's everything else. This is Chinese power generation. It's over 5,700 terawatt hours is just coal alone, right? More importantly, and should give everyone pause, is that 1/3 of the power generation in the world is in China. So 33% of all power generation in the world rests in China. That means they can produce anything. They are a manufacturing powerhouse. We have half of that power generation, half. Theirs is increasing exponentially. Elon Musk has been talking about this, that China is set to have 3 times as much electricity as we do. This is really important when we're talking about AI, and we're talking about actually developing things, not just manufacturing things, but critically artificial intelligence. This is our grid. We're not really growing, and we're adding these renewables. China is the only place in the world where they add renewables, but they don't take off the baseload power like coal. They're probably not working out that great anyway. I don't think most of those are real, but it's still, they're at 1,700. We're like a fraction of that, and yet we're seeing the impact to our energy prices. This is Chinese industrial electricity consumption. It looks like an exponential rocket ship. This is our industrial electricity consumption, okay? We are not investing in energy. We are not investing in the industry. This is huge. And this is partly what tariffs and a lot of the executive orders are trying to address, is making things here in America. I'm not talking t-shirts and things. I'm talking about ships and the ability to actually make things. And that's why autos are so important to that. This is Chinese historical primary energy consumption, just a way to chart it. That black is coal. So you're actually using more coal now, obviously, than you were in 1980. But to me, this is continuity. This is a lot of, I think about this really deeply, of thinking about this from a manufacturing standpoint, from a industrial standpoint, but also from a leadership standpoint. This is a choice. They chose to do this. That they chose it because they don't have the oil, but they also chose to lean into coal because it makes things. The tariffs, we already talked about that. Right now, well, as of last night, we had 30% tariffs on China. It was 20% for fentanyl. It was 10% for the reciprocal across the board. There's a big question mark in that. If Trump does not get the tariff pushback, like if he doesn't get pushback and that doesn't get changed, expect him to go after higher on autos and higher on steel and higher on the things that he can. So I would not think the tariff debate is over by a long stretch. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, he's talking about China needs to change. This is an opportunity for them to change. They, need to go from a manufacturing power to a consumption power, and that would help for everyone. They're not going to. This is their economy, and I think you can think about it really simply. This is manufacturing. That's the government investing in the industrial state, military included. This is the consumer, real estate. That's chosen. Just like the coal, this is chosen also. And when your consumer is not doing well, your consumer is saving, and that's what they do in China, and your consumer is not spending. Who has access to all that capital and all the banks and all the funds? China, the government, has access to everybody's money that's in the savings in a bank. That's really convenient for China, for the government. DeepSeek, we had this moment in January where everyone went a little bananas, and I know I'm over time and I'm gonna try to run through the rest of this quick. But this DeepSeek moment was huge, right? We lost more stock value off NVIDIA in one day than any share price performance in history. So that alone was interesting for the Chinese to just throw that out there. It was the most downloaded app in a single day because it was deep. Like it actually showed you, it just showed you deeper stuff. It showed how things worked. It's being used, I think the actual use cases in China are more significant, like they adapt to technology more. But the interesting thing was the reason it roiled our stock markets was because they said they did it really cheaply, they said they did it really fast, and they said they did it with a lot less energy. None of those are probably true. Like, they put everything in the kitchen sink at it. It was definitely funded by the government. It was definitely backed by the government. They got everything they wanted at it because they got us all spooked, and they used a crap ton of energy. But more importantly, it doesn't matter that they use a crap ton of energy because they have a crap ton of energy, right? And they just further subsidize that. If you're a biotech company, you know where you're starting up right now? You're starting up in China because they're giving you free rent, they're giving you free water, they're giving you free labor, and they're giving you massive subsidies on energy. So this is how they compete. It is to decimate competition. It is not to just compete with you, and that's why we have to fundamentally rethink this. This is Chinese oil demand. Again, this is kind of another floor or put on prices. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but that's Chinese oil consumption, right? Basically, that's just their imports. They've been stockpiling about 2 million barrels a day. There's no way in hell that China is using 17 million barrels a day of demand when their GDP or their economy is declining. Their GDP is nowhere close to 5%, but the point is that they're consuming that, they're stockpiling it, and so that's kind of a put on prices. The crude imports that I told you on the exposure side, that's what crude imports for China look like, is basically they're 12 million barrels per day. Most of those are coming from Saudi Arabia, from Russia, and from Iran. The Saudis would love to take some market share back from Russia. They're probably not saying that out loud. And they would love to take some market share back from Iran. And so yes, we're friends with the Saudis, but the Saudis love to play everyone off of each other. So expect them to continue to do that. This is production for OPEC. Just note that actually Venezuela increased output. They're over 900,000 barrels per day. So we didn't see this major change. OPEC is 26.7 million barrels per day. The Saudis just at 9 million barrels a day. They want to bring that back. So they are going to continue to increase output. They want 200,000, 300,000 barrels a day. They want their million barrel a day back. And that's what this OPEC increase is all about. That's Iran. That's Iranian production and consumption. So that gap is what they export. They export over 2 million barrels a day. Again, that's all going to China. I put this chart in here just to show you that that's Saudi production and Russian production. One, it's not nearly as variable as we think. It's kind of relatively range bound, and we are just eating their lunch with our production here. And so I think it's really important to think about, one, the production for the economy, what that does for our economy. We're also exporting more than these countries, we're exporting way more than Saudi Arabia. When we combine natural gas liquids, when we combine refined product, we're exporting a massive amount. But that's just your delta for what's going on, and looking at that and getting nerdy. This is the war in Ukraine. That's what the map looked like on day one, on February 24, 2022. This is what the map looks like today. I don't think we need to even talk about what's going to get carved up, because we're not going to get a peace deal, and Russia seems like they're just going to keep attacking. They might do the China thing and talk to get talks. I'm going to skip over this. That's our debt. Sorry, I will say this for a second. That's our inflation in orange. That's our unemployment in purple, oil prices in green, and interest rates in black. The Fed went a little too hard, and they did go a little too hard. They were very late to the party to raise the interest rates when we had inflation. Then they lowered them very quickly last year. And then we had kind of a spike in inflation. We still have this very entrenched inflation, and what's doing all the work is oil prices. But in previous bouts of inflation where we had high oil prices and we did not have inflation. So we can have higher oil prices and no inflation, but now we have this deep entrenched inflation, and this is a real big problem. I'm saying this because there are some weak spots in the economy, and we need to talk, or you need to think about them. This is our military spending in blue. That is our interest payments on our debt in the dotted line. It is about more than our military spending right now. So it is a very, very serious thing. And that's why you see bond yields going crazy. Happy to talk about that offline as well. Okay, U.S. electricity prices. This is U.S. electricity prices in red. This is one of your money take-home slides. This is killing the consumer. This is killing businesses. This is what we don't want. And this is what I think Chris Wright is starting to talk about. He's saying we don't want to decommission any more coal. We're probably not going to be able to add more coal into the grid, but at a minimum, you have to stop decommissioning your cheap baseload power generation, your reliable baseload power. Because what's happened is that's our coal, this is natural gas in yellow, that's nuclear in gray, that's hydro in blue, and that's wind and solar in green. And so we're not necessarily adding, but what we're seeing is that we're declining our coal, and we're adding a wind and solar. Shown a little differently, and this happens everywhere. That increase in electricity prices, we did not increase electricity prices for a decade. We had flat prices. But then we started aggressively decommissioning our coal, we started adding this wind and solar, and you see this correlated spike up. And that is just because when you put that intermittent wind and solar power into your grid, prices increase. Also, utility companies are taking everyone to the cleaners, and that needs to be addressed as well. So natural gas prices, you guys all know that they're crap, or they were in 2024, they were $2 an MCF. The average residential price for natural gas was $18 an MCF. This is the gap between what the resident pays and what Henry Hub is on a monthly basis. This is the gap annualized. That has really widened, and that has to be addressed. And it drives me crazy. I mean, the CEO of Excel makes $24 million a year. Their stock is like crazy. We have no pushback in Colorado. There is no Public Utility Commission pushback for the consumer. And I'm almost done. So this is German electricity and manufacturing. Again, this is what we don't want to do. This is why this is so important to have grid reliability and low and stable electricity prices. This is your grid in Germany. They've declined their output. I mean, Germany is the leader in the energy transition, talking about going green. You cannot go green if you do not have power. You have to plug in that EV to something. And the problem is you can't even plug into something. So what's happened is their manufacturing industry has been decimated, their auto production, one, because they've let exposure from China, but also because they have very, very high electricity prices. They're about 30 cents a kilowatt hour, where we're at 19, and we have to be very careful because if we keep notching up there, we're going to get into that German territory. And lastly, this is U.S. oil and gas production. We can talk about this, we can debate it a little bit, but that's just our production, that's our oil prices, that's gas production. My point here is that we're dropping rigs like crazy, about 10 a week right now, but our lateral lengths are incrementally growing. You guys know that in the Permian. We would really have to drop off completions significantly to really start lowering output. I do not see this as a COVID-style lowering output. But with that, I'm going to stop. And, you know,
like Indy 500 this weekend, that was pretty close. That was impressive.
Yeah.
All right. So I heard that our industry is the only one that's able to take it to Russia and Saudi Arabia. So we did our part and helping keep prices where they are. I'll jump to a couple questions. I know Bud has some. Okay, I got navigating China, I've got investment signals, but I'm going to jump right to the fun stuff. Colorado versus Texas.
Oh, nice.
So
you win.
You live in Colorado now. I want you to share personal experiences with just kind of the vibe, the policy decisions. What are you seeing on the ground, and more outside of politics, but just what are things we need to watch out for? How strangled is the oil and gas community? Is there a lot of local support? You know, you hear non-macro support, but what are you seeing on the front lines, I guess?
So it's really, really serious in that, like, because you say Texas, but obviously so many of your companies are exposed to New Mexico. And so what happens in Colorado, I mean, what happens in California will happen everywhere, and that's what we sort of see in Colorado. So on the ground, so I've been, like, we had Proposition 112, and that was in 2018. That was defeated, and that was amazing. I mean, I was podcasting about that. I was talking to everyone. Like, I never have signs in my yard, but I put signs in my yard. Like, I mean, this was really serious. Proposition 112 was a major setback rule that was basically going to put the industry out of business. And what was kind of amazing was, like, you know, I'm talking to friends and stuff, and people are like, nah, I wouldn't put the industry out of business, but that was its intent. So it was defeated, and largely defeated by Weld County. But then Polis comes in, and Jared Polis, the governor, does an interview that night on 9 News, and he basically says, yeah, I'm going after energy. And so, you know, what I see in Colorado on the ground floor is I see Jared Polis having dinner with a lot of industry leaders, and I see industry leaders, it's a little bit like people going to China and meeting with them and thinking, oh my gosh, they said all these nice things. It doesn't matter what he says, because he's going to screw you over. And I'm happy to say that on publicly and be on the record is that that's absolutely the case. Like, he can tell you whatever he wants to the industry leaders having dinner with him, but then he's just going to go do whatever. And so on the ground, like, it is not a purple, Colorado is not a purple state. It is a very, very blue state. It is a very, very far left state. The problem is places like Weld County are red, right? And I say that, I'm not trying to be super political. I'm saying I'm from rural America. I'm from rural Colorado, Craig, Colorado. They do not vote blue. And people are experiencing this like ranchers. I mean, this is like our way of life. It's like the people wearing cowboy boots and Carhartts are actually working and laboring. They're the ones most impacted by inflation. They're the ones feeling this. And so they also have energy, and they have cattle, and that's all the stuff that the Colorado is against, right? So on the ground, it really feels like the industry missed it, right? They really thought that they could do, even very up until very, very recently, the industry thought they could work with the the Polis administration. They thought they could do this, and what you've seen is that permits continue to decline, and that the people just keep buying companies, right? Everybody just buys each other out, and so now we have two big companies. Well, as much as like big companies are great, but you need private operators. Like, you need small private operators, because they help, like without them, we don't de-risk acreage. Like we don't keep pushing the envelope. And so I want private operators because they respond to natural gas prices. I want private operators because they respond to oil prices. They de-risk stuff. We no longer have that in Colorado because they can't get a permit. So no longer is the market deciding anything. It's all politics. And when you listen to, we see this at Colorado School of Mines on natural gas stuff, like when they're doing a responsible natural gas symposium, like it's amazing. Like the industry will be there and they won't say anything because they're afraid. And then you get like Oxy and Chevron, who I think have a disproportionate, or used to have a disproportionate influence with Koga. And I'm like, well, why is Koga not speaking out? And it feels like, and I could be wrong, but it feels like, Oxy and Chevron have said, just why don't you be quiet because we have permits in the queue. And well, that doesn't work for the smaller operators. And in New Mexico, you guys have a Independent Producers Association, the IPA-A&M, and you have NUMOGA. So you kind of have good cop, bad cop, and I think there needs to be more of that. But I think we have production up, but I'm not pleased with the big companies and their leadership, and I think we have to be very, very careful of that. If you let the big companies' leadership do it, and I say that because on the record, Darren Woods was telling everyone that we shouldn't pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. So we have to be careful of like where his pay is tied to, if it's paid to ESG metrics, and a lot of that is super impactful for on a state level, on a ground level, on a county level. You can't underline that one enough. So it's not good. You guys are winning in that department, but I would say your policies on power generation and that type of stuff, like you shouldn't have as much wind and solar in your grid as you do.
Good counterpoints. All right, we gotta stay vocal. You've traveled international recently, haven't you?
Yes.
Are you seeing a shift? Are they starting to get some of these slides, or what did you take away from your travel? You did London?
Yep.
Okay.
Barcelona's just a party town. So if you want to go there and drink, that's what people do. The weather's really nice. I was tagging along on a work trip, and so I actually met with the Ministry of Defense in London, and so I think that's really interesting, and it's why when you're meeting with different folks, you get a perspective on the China thing. I think that China and energy, they're really interlinked, and I've been working for the Pentagon for a long time, looking very tightly at China. So I always ask taxi drivers when I'm in London. I was there in December 2023. They were, all of them were saying like, hey, we like the energy transition, we're pro climate change, but maybe not right now. And so they seemed concerned about the economy. They don't seem as concerned about the economy now, except you hear people say, like if you talk to locals, like they think that they're so upset about the politics in the UK, the spending, everything. They think it's amazing that we cut a deal with them and we got really good terms, they got really bad terms. And so they're like, wow, Trump's a genius because this is a terrible deal for us. That's what I heard. I met with the Bank of England. They always ask very interesting questions. I am always surprised that the level of questions of so much stuff on oil, so much stuff of like how is Trump impacting oil policy. So those are interesting, but I think one of the biggest standouts is they are just kind of awakening to China as a threat too, and they struggle with that because they're so tight with China, and their exposure is so big, and so they're struggling to get members of parliament to even calculate that we could have a conflict, like a kinetic conflict in the Indo-Pacific, like in the next 10 years. And so I can only imagine if you have politicians that you're struggling to even for them to contemplate that, it's pretty hard to just talk. And so when I bring up energy and I'm like, so what about China energy? They're like, oh my gosh, like the energy it's a massive problem. And they know it because they have very high prices. And I think you have a lot of people thinking, kind of like I think we heard here in the industry, people saying we need a crisis to wake people up. They had crises and it didn't necessarily wake them up. So I'm not super optimistic. I'm optimistic in that I feel like I met some people that they know what they need to work on. But it would be nice not to have Europe completely down for the count in a global conflict.
One question, then I think it'd probably be good to get to the audience for questions, but it seems apparent to most of us that "Drill Baby Drill" was a campaign slogan, and whereas "Build Baby Build" is clear agenda on the agenda for the administration with reshoring. And it seems that they've adopted the Reagan approach to lower oil and gas prices, drives down inflation, drives up economic productivity, and benefits the economy. But is there also, do you think, an element of grossing up the supplies in preparation for potential real sanctions, or potential sanctions anyway, if the talks with Iran, which I think most of us believe are not likely to yield a real, teeth in terms of their funding of terrorism, and also potential sanctions against Russia if there's no resolution, or as you seem to think is unlikely with Ukraine, and even potentially Venezuela. Do you have a view on all of that?
Yeah, so, and then maybe, and I know Matt wanted me to tie it up with a nice little bow and all that thread. So I think that the administration they're a bit separate and together, right? So I think Chris Wright is very aware of the global scene and the underpinnings. He knows that the oil industry, the U.S. oil industry, isn't going to be increasing output at $55 a barrel, right? He also knows that the Trump administration doesn't want 75, right? So I think we need to kind of, but they're also, again, they're not articulating any of this, right? So it would be, I think what the administration needs to realize is that 65 is great for everyone, and it's really that consistency in price. Now, they're clearly doing a lot of back channeling with Saudis. The Trump administration has always had they talk with them, right? We lost our relationship with Saudi Arabia with the Biden administration. Like, they weren't talking at all. And so then they wanted a deal because they wanted to do this deal with Iran, and they were hoping for something. They hoped they could get Saudi on board, so they were going to give them nuclear power, or at least they were talking about it. We don't need to be giving anyone in the Middle East nuclear anything. So I think we should pull that off the board, because in the Middle East, nuclear power is never just power. But the problem is Iran is not going to stop enriching uranium, right? They're not going to stop. They want a weapon, and so they're going to continue to do it. And I think that's what the Trump administration are realizing, is they can try, but then he would look weak if he lets them do it. So I think, every administration, I'm not criticizing the Trump administration for this, but every administration comes in and they hope all these things, and then reality hits, and geopolitical realities are hitting. And I don't think it was a bad idea. Like, there was a chance that there's reasons that Russia should stop even for a little bit, but they're not going to. And there are reasons, absolutely, that Ukraine wants a ceasefire. And a ceasefire would have helped just get everyone to the table, but we can't seem to get a ceasefire. And that's what always happens in war. They're seeing that. I think the problems with oil is that, okay, we know the Saudis are increasing output. We are doing all the things on the rule side, like permits and saying we're open for business. I think a lot of that more to do is actually LNG. If you look at Trump's trip to the Middle East, so much of that was focused on LNG. It was getting their money to invest in our LNG for us to have the funding to actually bring these projects to fruition. So much that's LNG, and that's really where I think this administration is saying, hey, invest in natural gas, because if we export more LNG, we can produce more oil because we'll have slightly higher natural gas prices. That's a huge component. That takes a lot of work and timing. Again, this is not being articulated or explained. So I think the build, baby, build, or it's not really drill, baby, drill. It is that I do think they're serious. The drill, baby, drill is that we want you to drill, baby, drill. You're not going to at 55, but at 65 you might. And what can I do to help you make that happen? And if that is, if we have $5 net gas, I'm not saying we will have $5 net gas, that would be pretty amazing. $5 net gas I didn't show you the charts on Ohio, this one. It's kind of amazing you stack up Wyoming, Ohio, and Utah, you have 600,000 barrels a day of production. I call this quiet growth because no one's talking about it. And Ohio is off to the races. I mean, people left the Utica for dead years ago, and now EOG is the Utica is really cool. And they're buying up assets in the Eagle Ford, and gas is starting to become exciting again. And so I think we're seeing that ebb and flow. And so I think natural gas is a huge component of that. And I think we're just in this, the administration's not articulating. I would love to just help Chris Wright on the PR side of just explaining all the stuff to the industry. I think they do need an industry. They really need a person talking to the industry, because they do need the industry support. And the industry being critical of the Trump administration, I don't think that you're going to get any favors I don't think whining about oil prices is going to get you any favors. But I also think that imagine where we would be if we had a different administration. And trust me, you would definitely have high oil prices. I just don't know if you're going to get a permit in New Mexico. And that's where I say that the lessons from Colorado are super important, because we saw the first 2 months of the Biden administration where you couldn't get a permit on federal land. And so I think we just have to be very, very careful with that thinking.
What is your view on the appetite for decarbonization from the West, kind of thinking past Trump and all of the lack of enthusiasm? Is the trajectory now away from it kind of for the next medium to long term, or will it come back and oscillate up?
I'm seeing more like people are still talking about it. And it's so there's still like this thinking about. I'm a little surprised because I was listening to like Middle East coverage late night a couple nights ago, and it was on CNBC, and I was kind of blown away that because we have another COP meeting coming up, and so I was talking about it. The problem is you have to have buy-in from the U.S. has to give you money, and so what China has been asking. China has a big influence in the United Nations, which is part of this, right? The UN kind of is the one leading all the momentum around climate because they actually have the big report, right, that says we are going to burn in hell in about 10 years because we're going to exceed our 1.5 degrees and we're all going to die. So that's what the UN's saying. Well, so the UN has all this buy-in from China, and so now we even have China's Belt and Road Initiative is now deemed green, and we have China saying, well, we need the US and the West to buy wind and solar wind turbines and solar panels from China. We need them to put that in the developing world. That's cooling, right? You're not seeing a lot of talk on at least U.S. bodies. You're not seeing talk on as much decarbonization. What you are hearing right now is I think globally I'm still hearing it in Europe, although it's severely weakened. So I think if you wanted to make monetary bets against it, you absolutely could, because it's not going to get off the map. And the Trump administration has an opportunity, and I am all for it, for stopping this dead in its track and making it really difficult. What's very interesting is the pushback you're seeing from even folks in North Dakota saying, well, hey, we're getting all these green subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, the Inflation Reduction Act was a massive, massive spending bill that was completely partisan. It was a 100% Democratic vote. Yet Republicans got some subsidies in it for all this crappy green energy, increasing our electricity prices. That, I feel like the education piece and the stuff that Jason, we have got to do this as an industry, talk more about this. And it sounds like I'm just ripping on wind and solar, because I am. It's really, really bad forms of energy that when we put into our grid, we're screwing the average consumer and we're preventing our business from getting off the map. And you know what's amazing is and I'm gonna bring this home on China for a second. I'm just thinking, when I stare at these charts on China, I think about it as they don't give a crap about this. They're not having these conversations. So if we have any chance of competing with them and winning, we've got to stop talking about decarbonization. But it is still continuing. But the wind has been out of the sails like crazy. And I do think, depending on how this Trump administration navigates the economy side, you're making it much more able to invest in oil and gas assets. I think that's great for private equity. I think that's great for upstream. And I do think the business, we need to do a better job getting this information publicly, so that publicly it's more okay, that people understand what Exxon is doing, so they invest in Exxon as a long only, right? That is still missing in the marketplace. We need to do a better job as the industry of getting the information in the marketplace.
So in an increasingly AI-driven U.S. economy, and particularly if you think that wind and solar are trash, how do we address our power needs over the next decade?
They're huge. So it's a great question. I don't think adding wind and solar would have addressed them, but that was the hope, right? Is that you would add that. I think it's a lot of folks are talking nuclear. We haven't actually added a lot of nuclear. I think I had my first nuclear podcast starting to talk about this on the last podcast, so I encourage you to take a listen. But it's we're starting to think about it. There's a lot of optimism around nuclear with this administration. It's a lot harder to build it than people realize. So you're more likely to build to existing, stopping the decommissioning of nuclear and building onto existing. If you look at California and you look at their electricity prices, something that looks a lot like Colorado is that as Colorado decommissioned the coal and added the renewables, the prices went up. In California, they decommissioned the nuclear and they added the renewables and prices went up. And it's really about decommissioning that stable, reliable, baseload dispatchable power. So we need nuclear probably to do this. We have a lot of natural gas. So we have got to get over ourselves, and this is where the utilities and the provisions of putting stuff into the grid, we have to be able to build more large combined cycle natural gas facilities. We shouldn't have an energy problem. China builds out, people talk about, they build a coal plant a week. They do. And so they have more than enough power. They don't even share power between Chinese provinces. Here we need to have when you have redundant power, it's like having a redundant pipeline, right? It's like having more pipeline capacity than you need out of North Dakota. Helps your discount, helps your differential. We have more than enough pipeline capacity out of the DJ Basin in Colorado. Helps your discount, helps your differential. We got to have that for power because it's going to help on prices. I don't think utility providers love that idea, and they are passing on the cost of wind and solar onto the consumer through natural gas prices and everything. So I think it's going to come from natural gas. You have to minimum stop decommissioning coal. You know, we should be using coal when we need to. So if we increase our natural gas and we keep the coal, if we have a spike in natural gas, we can use the coal to offset. I don't think we're going to increase emissions very much, probably if any, because we're using more natural gas. But it's just not going to be done through wind and solar because you can't manufacture off of that. So I think it's natural gas, and if we can get nuclear, that'd be great. I'm a little, I'm hesitant on that because we've been talking about doing that since the 60s, and it's hard to put a pick and shovel in the ground and actually build it. If we do it, awesome, I'm all for it.
And the wind and solar has to be backed up anyway.
Exactly. So yeah, and that's also where the costs come from, right? It's because we're doing it and then we're backing it up and then we have this redundancy. But push comes to shove, and the reality is you see it in Germany, you see it in Europe. Their manufacturing industry is declining, their economies are declining, their ability to turn their lights on is diminished. If you go to London in the winter, I was in Oxford in December 2023, you're freezing. You go into a shop to buy something and they're in their coats, they're freezing because they don't turn the heat on because they can't afford it. I don't want to live in a country like that. That is ridiculous. And I'm sure as hell not going to win a war against China if I live in a country like that. We just have to get into a realistic world. And that's where I think people are aware of this stuff, right? They're aware of it, even if they don't love it. If they don't love what I say about wind and solar, they're aware that they do want to eat, right? That they do want to turn the lights on.
More questions?
I have a question. This is for the whole panel. If we normalize to a $65 WTI price, what do you all think the industry looks like 5 years out? And specifically, do we get to a point where, I assume rig count remains kind of around where it is, and we drill the same number of wells we're drilling, and everybody's making an okay return, but not sufficient to really ramp the rig count and ramp domestic production and so forth. Do we get back to an environment, does something happen if we skirt a recession, or we get back to an environment where we get $80 oil or some catalyst to cause a real ramp in the rig count?
I'm going to let you start.
And M&A,
I'm happy to take it, but I don't want to bias your...
And then you guys may add to my comments. And Jim and I have talked about this a little bit. I do think you mentioned what the administration is doing is improving the permitting process, providing more access to more lands, western lands, but particularly Alaska. And so one question I ask myself is improved access. Where we added 8.5 million barrels with shale. That's amazing. And think about what the world would be like if we had not done that, what oil prices would be if U.S. shale had not come along and possibly disrupted worldwide energy. But we're not going to add another 8.5, and particularly at $60, $65. I think we're going to be on a slight decline here at 60, 65, 70, maybe flat, and that's not modeling based. That's just kind of intuitive. But the question I have is that access. How much near-term more supply can we add in Alaska, for example, particularly with pipelines and improving LNG exports, et cetera? Then the other question is the shale happened in the U.S. primarily because of economic freedom and property rights, because we're the only country people own the minerals. But we know there's some other countries where there are shale plays. Brian and others are involved in Australia. There's other provinces which have emerging shale plays. Maybe some of that supply comes from those regions, some of which are becoming more liberal economically and have more economic freedom. So those are the kind of things that I'm weighing. But my sense is, my view is that, and one thing we might have you address also is the physical versus the financial markets in oil, because it seems apparent to a lot of people that there's some manipulation going on in the financial markets for oil. But my sense is longer term that oil prices, and this again is intuitive, need to head higher because the marginal barrel is more expensive than $60 a barrel to achieve economic returns. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Just adding to that, it's a pretty concerning spot we're in, because I think Case's comments were correct. The geologic headwinds in the known lower topside risk areas are real. Parent-child effects and spacing. We're eating up core in tier 1.
We're going to get more real too.
Yeah, and they're going to hit us quickly. So now I think we were punch drunk off of the shale revolution from 2010 So you have to go to old school E&P, and it's just going to look a lot different than the last decade, I think. Yeah.
More risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And then is the financing community, I don't know how many billions came into our industry to support the shale growth, because you could quickly, fast cycle, see the results. And okay, you're outspending right now, but I see a path to where you will make money. And then that kind of didn't happen in 15, 16, and then kind of didn't happen in 18 and 19. We actually did pretty good coming out of COVID as an industry, reshoring our balance sheets. But when you're trying to prove up these new plays, do you have the investor, not wherewithal, but gumption, I guess, to stick through it? Yeah.
So it's a really good question, and I tried to front load a little bit talking about the physical and the financial, kind of the supply and demand realities not being real. There's a lot to this, and those are I don't disagree with any of that. I think those are really valuable. I try to look at it from 80 different angles, and one is that right now, and you guys are all oil companies, you know this, but we aren't investing in production, right? So what do the Saudis do right now? What do UAE, what do all these countries do? They think about when prices are lower, let's increase output. So as an oil company, you can be thinking about when prices are lower, I don't have to put the drill bit back in the ground, but I should be maximizing the output I have, right? It really is free money, guys. This is put a pumper on this. You're going to pay $100,000 a year for that pumper. Pay him $150,000, you'll get a really good one, and let him baby those wells and just increase your output. When I've been talking to my clients for a couple years about this, and they'll honestly say, no, we haven't been focusing on production that much because we've been really focusing on drilling, completing wells. And as an industry, I think that 13 and change million barrels a day that we have, a lot of that, we haven't been focusing, babying that production. And so I wouldn't say there's lots of low-hanging fruit in tier one, we can drill this and it's $50 oil and it's super awesome and we're just going to get money coming to us. No, we don't have that. But I always think about what could push it, right? It's not the big changes, it's not step changes. And I mean, I worked in DC for several years, and then I traveled the world talking to companies, and I always heard in the beginning of the shale revolution, with 2010 to 2014, everybody always said, what's the next big thing? And I was told them it's not a big thing. It's not what are you asking? Is it a newfangled drill bit? That's what they kind of wanted me to hear. And it was the incremental changes. And I still think now that's something we don't appreciate as an industry, is the incremental changes, the little bit of knowledge, the doing a little bit better. And we've done a ton of stuff on efficiency, but we probably are at $65 oil. And that's amazing that I think it's important to think about this. If I told you we are going to $58 a barrel and we're going to stay there for 4 months, how would you feel? Probably that's not awesome. How about if I told you we're going to go to 63 and we're going to stay there for the rest of the year? You're going to feel a little bit better, not amazing, but a little bit better. It's a $5 difference. We are talking about $5. And so yes, that adds up, but I think we have psychological thresholds. $65, if we stayed there for the rest of the year, it's not going to be amazing for the industry. It's not going to be horrible. And then I think, what we learned coming out of COVID was also, if you drop and you ramp up, you lose a lot in the middle. So we need to not do that. And so this is the time, yes, you don't want to be drilling and producing like crazy, but should you be drilling through it? Not necessarily producing, but everyone I am hearing is saying they are lowering their day rates, right? So I hear different things on casing costs from a lot of different operators. Most people are saying it's not as big a deal. Some people Diamondback says it's the reason they're not ducking, but they also say they have too many ducks. This could be duck baby duck instead of drill baby drill. So, and maybe there's some reasons for that, but $65 oil, that's probably where the global market is, honestly, for supply and demand. That's probably not taking in super amount of geopolitical risk premium. We probably should be really where we were toward the end of last year, which is that 69, a little higher 60s. That's supply and demand, right? We have a lot of supply. The other thing we have to worry about is these guys, when you have $65 oil, we talk about Saudi break even, Saudi fiscal break even. Well, Saudi fiscal break even, they say, is $100 a barrel. That's to budget their budget of their economy, everything, because a lot of Saudis don't actually work. They actually just pay people to just live because they get all this money from oil. And I'm not ripping on individuals who get this, although there's probably things I could probably rip on. But that's how their economy is run. And there's some very unsavory actors, including Mohammed bin Salman. But their break even to produce a barrel of oil is about $6. So we're not going to compete with them in terms of break even, all right? But we have to realize that they're punch drunk on oil prices. So there's a level here, and so we have to be careful is that when prices go to 70, the reason we are struggling right now with oil prices is because we have a lot of oil production. And that's what the Saudis are realizing is, hey, we let prices be too high for too long, and then guess what? Everybody, not just the US, produces more oil. Guyana, like you look all across the world, and that's why I say we have to be careful, because it's not, we do need to figure out ways internally, and I know that's hard at these prices, but like we need to figure out ways to do it better with less, because other countries and other places are going to do that, and you're going to have that in the rest of the world. So we know we have plenty of oil supply around the world. We know we have it. We're not going to run out of oil, like guaranteed. I will be the remember to be humble. We're not going to run out. We will produce it. I just don't think that when I hear the industry saying we're going to have 75 or 85 in a couple of years and that's then when I'll make all my money, I don't think you should bank on that, because that's not how oil prices work out. They work out like this, which is kind of a shit show. So you got to be able to ride through that, and so we have to be able to ride that volatility. And then that's where I think natural gas prices and the de-risking, and that's where I think telling the story about the funding and investment. Like, I don't want people pulling out of oil and gas right now. I want them to see that yes, we're down a little bit, but this is an opportunity, and this is the opportunity to be thinking through and digesting information and not losing your mind. I don't hear this in this room. I'm not even seeing it on your faces, but trust me, I have plenty of meetings and stuff where it is like the world is ending, and I don't think at $60 oil the world is ending.
Just want to
Yeah.
You don't want to see people leaving the industry. Is the administration, we understand they're attuned to lower oil prices because of inflation and so forth, but that's also coming with job losses. You see Chevron announced yesterday that they're cutting jobs. I mean, at some point in time, unemployment in this industry, because we in the industry know once people leave, they rarely come back.
Yep.
So are they attuned to that kind of yin and yang?
I would like them to be more attuned. So this is where I really think there needs to be a dialogue between the industry and the administration. And I think the industry has gotten, like, I think of all the agencies and all the groups and everything everybody puts money to. It's all over the place. We need to pull our efforts together and like do this right. API lost their way, during COVID and everything, because they were just pandering to the Biden administration and they wanted to decarbonize and everything. Well, Jiminy Crickets, it's the oil and gas industry. If you're decarbonizing, it's about scope 3 emissions, which is end user emissions. You're not going to decarbonize. So why don't you just focus on what you do, which is producing oil and gas well and doing it responsibly. So we do have a problem there that it's a huge component of the economy. We are a manufacturing sector of the economy. We are drilling and producing oil. We're not only keeping, the 13 million barrels a day, like that money is going into our economy, but we're not exporting it. It's the benefits are huge, and yes, the jobs are huge, and all of this is massive. So, the change, if this was to change and we start dropping output and we start importing more barrels, that's really significant. And so I think they are attuned. I think they just think the easiest lever to help lower inflation, which they're already seeing, is, hey, we lower oil prices and we see this. They need to get more comfortable with stability in prices at 65, because you don't want those job losses. And that's something, again, hand up in the air. It needs to be done. I probably desperately need to spend more time in Washington and try to push that. Chris Wright knows that, right? But he's kind of busy doing a lot of things, like making sure we figure out where that $96 billion went or whatever, these types of things. So there's a lot going on. This is not a one-man show. And they still, again, they don't have a lot of people in their positions in the administration. So it's really, really serious. And as an industry, I would say that's something like when I hear from manufacturing companies that are saying, I'm talking to the administration and it's going well. I think the oil and gas industry needs to be doing that too. They need to be talking to the administration and saying, hey, we support you wanting to lower inflation, but we have this is our price point and here's what we can do within that price point, but we need it to be stable. And FYI, you have the SPR, so just help us out here with this bandwidth. But the industry then needs to hold up their end of the bargain, right? They need to, you can't have big companies, I won't name names, but like in New Mexico calling for the bonding requirements so they can put the little guys out of business. Come on, no, we can't have that. Like the industry needs to be the industry. And I'm third generation oil and gas. I love the industry, but call a spade a spade.
Okay. But do you have a
Well, can I just set you up for one last?
Yes. Yep.
So you had a slide earlier that pointed out we're going to be wrong on prices. We're operating in the context now of $60, $65 a barrel, and we're projecting for it. We're going to be wrong.
Oh.
And with Gene brought up with AI, with automation, the power demands on a go-forward basis and the impact on productivity and efficiency, a lot of people believe it's going to be up and to the right, and the demand for power associated with that. So, I just point that out because you pointed it out. There's a slide there that we're thinking in the context of where we are, $60 to $65 a barrel. But if we have robots within 5 years in our home doing all these things, we have robots in our plants doing work, and we have AI, and we're doing the work of 5 people. All of a sudden, we're consuming so much more energy as a world.
So I think that, and I know you have a question as well. I think that the demand for natural gas, that they do get that. The administration does it. So I really think that it's huge. So on power side, your question on the power side, like, we are not appreciating that we have to grow our grid and it's going to be natural gas. And everywhere in the world is recognizing that. We have an opportunity also to export our natural gas and export it like everywhere. Like, it's easy button, right? Export this LNG, export it everywhere. And you know what comes with that? Implicit security guarantees, because our vessels are traversing the ocean, so we have to keep up our side of the military agreement. Really big for Asia. If we are exporting more LNG to Asian countries, we are helping pull them away from China, and this is really serious. If they have our LNG, they can manufacture. We have to make sure they have our LNG. We should backstop that with coal. We should say, hey, if that we have a price spike in LNG, we'll give you some coal, because, by the way, we have a crap ton of coal. That doesn't hurt your environment. That doesn't hurt, like, it's a little bit, but coal is super energy secure, right? It's a rock, it's a solid form. And so if we gave those guarantees and said, yep, you have our LNG, and if we have a price spike, you can have our coal, that's hugely beneficial for our multiple industries. That's beneficial for US and jobs. And then we make sure that we have this natural gas base. So we have to work, though, but the disconnect I'm seeing is that the administration can do all they want on LNG exports. They're working on the funding from the Middle East, where we still have enough climate and decarbonization efforts that we are still impacting Western funding. And that's something on the physical financial. We have seen so many Western entities and firms and banks pull out of trading, like pulling out of WTI, pulling out of oil and gas. And so what you've seen is a disproportionate amount of Asian and Middle East entities in oil and gas. So if you sometimes are wondering why your bank that you're talking to is giving you something a little wonky, it could be because they have some Gulf influence or some Asian influence, and that's why we're seeing things a little bit skewed. So that's really, really important. But absolutely, so there's a bigger, broader thing, and so that's why I say on the utility side, the stuff that's going on a state level is really, really serious. Like, we have got to get that right, because we're going to have to scale that up.
Yeah. We could go on, but I want our first Austin Energy meeting to end on time, and then we want to stay after and
Absolutely.
talk with Trisha. I'm sure she will have some opinions. So, Trisha, really appreciate it. This is great to have you.
Awesome. That was great.